As Hurricane Fiona left a swath of destruction across the Caribbean and North Atlantic this past week, it was a reminder of the devastating power of coastal storms. Scientists are predicting more intense weather because of climate change, but they're also warning that one of the best existing sources of protection from waves and floods is dying off. By serving as natural buffers, coral reefs prevent billions of dollars in damage to the U.S. each year, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. The state of Florida, which has been hit by 18 hurricanes over the last 40 years, has one of the largest barrier reefs in the world, but nearly 90% of the living coral in the Florida Keys has disappeared during that time. The situation's so serious that marine biologists have stepped up their efforts to find innovative ways to try to rescue the reefs. And that's what our story tonight is about. It involves strange underwater farms, the U.S. Department of Defense, and more than we ever thought we'd need to know about the sex lives of coral. We left Miami behind us and headed 2 miles off the coast with marine biologists Andrew Baker and Diego Lerman. They're old friends and colleagues, professors at the University of Miami who've seen firsthand how the reefs have changed.
The whole of the Caribbean is seeing a lot of coral loss and die-off as a result of climate change, but also water quality and pollution. But Florida Keys probably leads the way in terms of the sheer amount of coral that's been lost.
And that's why, in this spot in the ocean, the University of Miami has built something you'd normally visit on land to buy a tree or a rose bush, a nursery.
This is our coral nursery. This is where just like you do on land, you grow your corals, you prune them, and then you put them somewhere else on a natural reef.
Andrew, you good? All right, don't forget to close your ambient breathing valve.
The water was murky and the current strong as we went to take a look. A nurse shark checked us out but quickly lost interest. Corals are often confused with rocks or plants, but they're actually colonies of tiny animals called polyps, whose calcium carbonate skeletons build the reefs and protect the shores. After a short swim, we came upon an area with 40 of these tree-like structures.
What are we looking at?
Hanging from them, like Christmas ornaments, are pieces of living coral that have been pruned from healthy colonies all over Florida. They're positioned close to the surface so they get lots of sunlight and nutrients, and occasionally cleaned of macroalgae that can damage them. Andrew Baker explained.
And the great advantage of these nurseries is they allow us to grow lots of coral tissue very quickly. They grow faster in these trees than they do on the reef.
Many of the corals growing here are important and threatened Florida species, like staghorn and elkhorn. Every diver knows you're not supposed to touch coral, so it was odd to be handed a clipper and told to start cutting off pieces. We brought the staghorn coral I cut to an area nearby called Rainbow Reef that Professor Lerman and his team began replanting 2.5 years ago. He showed me how to use a special kind of cement to attach the newly cut pieces to the reef. With the current, it's a lot harder than it sounds. But even more difficult is making sure these corals don't get killed off by the same forces that destroyed their predecessors: water pollution, disease, and a phenomenon called bleaching, in which coral can lose their color and die because of rising ocean temperatures caused by climate change.
We need to make sure that the corals that we put out are not just going to be the next set of victims for the next bleaching episode or the next stressor that comes along.
In a sense, it sounds like you're trying to accelerate the process of natural selection. Try to find the corals which are hardier, which can survive in higher temperatures.
That's exactly right.
Did we ever look at
To do that, Professor Baker and scientists from the Shedd Aquarium in Chicago are using a technique that allows them to determine the future survivability of coral in a few hours on a boat anchored above the nursery. When we arrived, researchers were putting samples of elkhorn coral just brought to the surface into these converted party coolers containing increasingly warm water to see which varieties would do best in higher temperatures. Ross Cunning is a research biologist with the Shedd Aquarium.
So just like all of us are different genetic individuals, and all of us humans vary in traits like height, all of these different genetic strains of elkhorn coral will vary naturally in heat tolerance.
So just because it's all elkhorn coral, it doesn't mean it's all the same genetically.
Right, and that's exactly what we want to get at, is the fine-scale individual variation among different elkhorn corals. Then we can use those corals to optimize restoration programs by planting more of them on the reef.
So these samples...
Scientists are also trying to breed the most heat and disease-resistant coral together. It's called selective breeding. Liv Williamson is a biologist at the University of Miami. Her lab is filled with vats of frozen coral sperm.
So this is coral sperm.
This is coral sperm that has been kept at these really, really low temperatures now for a year or more.
Her work is similar to that of domestic animal breeders. She and her team mix the sperm with carefully chosen coral eggs to create offspring that'll be more likely to survive outbreaks of disease and rising ocean temperatures.
I never thought I would ask this question, but how do coral have sex?
So the idea is that all of the different colonies on a reef, they're all using cues from the environment to make sure that they release their eggs and sperm all at once so that they're able to mix with the spawn of other colonies.
The sex life of coral is nothing to write home about. Most spawn only once or twice a year after a full moon, so scientists have to be ready to capture the sperm and eggs at the exact right moment.
We use very fine mesh nets with a jar at the top, and they slowly float their way up into the jar, and all we have to do is cap off the jar and take it with us. It literally looks like being in a snow globe underwater. It's amazing. It's totally incredible to be able to see it.
This is where Williamson raises what she calls the coral babies she's bred. The blue light mimics sunlight filtering through the water, helping them grow.
This particular brain coral baby that you're holding right now is actually the offspring of a coral colony here in Miami that we think is resistant to disease.
So you know the history of these polyps?
Yeah, in many cases I collected them as eggs or sperm, or I put them together to fertilize them. Have been there really since birth, if you will.
Do you feel like warm and cuddly toward coral?
I really do.
Do you? Because, I mean, it's not something that...
They don't seem too warm and cuddly. I show coral baby pictures to people, and they usually don't want to see them, but...
Today, they're growing slowly on small ceramic plates, but they may someday be growing in underwater nurseries and repopulating reefs.
And you said this one's how old?
Almost a year old. Corals in general grow really slowly, but that's part of the problem with their conservation is that while we're losing these big, old colonies on the reef, some of those are thousands or hundreds of years old. They've taken so long to grow. Replacing them isn't easy.
But with less coral serving as a natural buffer, many communities need more protection right away from increasingly powerful storms that have been battering their shores. One way researchers hope to restore coral and provide more immediate protection along the coast is to create hybrid reefs. This is a small-scale prototype. The honeycomb structures on the bottom would be made of concrete and are designed to absorb wave energy immediately. The corals on top would provide more and more protection as they grow.
When the waves break, they throw up a lot of spray.
Inside the simulator at the University of Miami's Rosenstiel School of Marine, Atmospheric, and Earth Science, Professor Brian House and his team can create the equivalent of a Category 5 hurricane with winds up to 155 miles per hour.
So now we'll turn on the paddle and you'll see it really change a lot. Like they start hitting the, like right now, boom,
Wow.
right?
Oh my God.
And you see the waves are breaking preferentially over that structure.
The simulator can test how well different structures and types of coral absorb wave energy and prevent damage on land.
So this is Category 5.
Wow. The University of Miami is developing this hybrid reef for DARPA, which is the Pentagon's research agency. The Defense Department is looking for ways to protect its many military bases near the coast, like Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, which got destroyed by Hurricane Michael in 2018, causing nearly $5 billion in damage. DARPA plans to give the University of Miami up to $20 million to build a hybrid reef off the coast of Florida within the next 5 years.
What role does coral play in that as opposed to just a man-made honeycomb structure?
Depending on the types of waves and things, you can have anywhere as high as 60% of additional dissipation of wave energy by having corals on top of the structure. They add friction to the surface.
I mean, this isn't just a man-made structure that is static. Because of the coral, it would actually expand, it would continue to grow.
That's one of the real exciting things about this. It's essentially self-healing, and if it gets impacted by a storm, it can grow back.
Professors Baker and Lerman will provide the coral on DARPA's hybrid reef, with specific goals in mind.
They have very ambitious goals for you.
They do, and I think that reflects the scale of the problem, to be honest. We know that, for example, coral reefs are going to be facing increasing warming temperatures. So here's a project that's asking us to try to achieve what corals are going to face in 20 to 30 years within just a 5-year time frame, and then actually go well beyond that.
So they're saying within 5 years that they want you to be able to find coral that can resist a 2°C rise in temperatures in the ocean?
That's right. 2 or even 3 degrees centigrade warmer temperatures.
Were you surprised that DARPA was interested in your work?
We were surprised in the sense that it was the Department of Defense that was the first agency to come forward and say, hey, you guys, as a community, why don't you think big?
DARPA also recently awarded contracts to Rutgers University to create a hybrid reef that'll use oysters rather than coral, and to the University of Hawaii, which is developing a different configuration of coral and other materials. And DARPA is not the only government agency taking action. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is using nursery-grown coral to restore 7 iconic reefs in the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary.
Push the other coral in.
There are many potential obstacles to restoring coral reefs, as Diego Lerman and his team learned after Hurricane Irma hit Florida in 2017.
It was a major setback. We lost 90% of all of the corals that we had been growing for a decade.
Wow.
It was a huge loss, but we also rebuilt very quickly.
There's not much anyone can do about a major hurricane, but perhaps the biggest criticism of restoring reefs or creating hybrid ones is that it's not possible to do this on the scale that's needed.
Thank you. You got it, man.
There are some people who think this is like spitting into the ocean, that this is not going to be enough to counteract climate change.
We get that all the time. But if we don't address this challenge in terms of maintaining coral resilience in the meantime while we deal with some of these larger societal problems, we won't have any coral reefs left by the time we get this other problem under control.
Without a meaningful reduction of carbon gases to address climate change, will you be able to rescue the reefs?
Absolutely not. The mantra is we are buying time.
The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predicts that with a 2 degrees Celsius increase in warming, 99% of the world's coral reefs could be irreversibly lost in the next 30 years. I mean, that's a pretty dire assessment.
That's right. So coral reefs are on their way to becoming probably the first global ecosystem that we'll lose as a result of climate change. So, we have no time to lose.
Falconry, the art of hunting with birds of prey, was born in the forbidding Altai Mountains of Central Asia. Hunters there still loft golden eagles into the sky in a partnership of man and bird that predates recorded history. We say man, but in truth, one of the best hunters in Mongolia today is a woman from Oklahoma City. Lauren McGow took us to one of the most remote places on Earth to meet the hunters who trained her. And before the next few minutes are through, you will know what it's like to fly like an eagle. The Mongolian steppe is the greatest expanse of grassland unaltered by humankind. It endures because human existence has narrow odds between the widest climate extremes on Earth, 104 degrees in summer, 50 below in winter. Nomads depend on the animals that yield nearly all of their food, fiber, clothing, and fuel. And one of the oldest bonds in nature is an alliance of survival among hunters, horses, and golden eagles.
This is the most ancient form of falconry in the world. This is where it all began. It's the cradle. So several thousand years ago, we don't know precisely when, a man saw an eagle catch a rabbit or a fox and had the ingenious idea to hunt in partnership with it. It blows my mind that it's even real. It's like something out of Lord of the Rings, but you can do it.
Lauren McGow was in high school when she dedicated her life to raptors. She traveled with us to the place she calls the cradle. 6,000 miles led us first to the Mongolian capital of Ulaanbaatar. This civilization conquered the known world in the 13th century. The Mongols ranged from Asia to Europe, the largest contiguous empire of all time. From here, we flew another 800 miles to Bayan-Olgi, where Mongolia, Russia, China, and Kazakhstan meet. This was the end of the road, but not the end of our journey. We crossed the open steppe, past wild Bactrian camels with 2 humps, a vanishing species with only about 1,000 left in the world. Our destination was a camp of nomads, people who introduced Lauren McGow to the golden eagle.
Hello!
They hadn't seen her in 2 years.
Deja! Feels like I never left. Just in a few minutes of seeing everybody. Such a magical place.
Now, how did a woman from Oklahoma end up out here in Mongolia?
Well, I read a book on falconry, and it's like the fire was lit. I just knew I had to do it. And as I was researching, I went to the library and I found this old book that had black and white photos of eagle hunters from Mongolia. So, you know, this beautiful shaggy horse and this man with a giant eagle and a fox pelt on his horse, and it just looked like the most incredible thing. And I thought, I have to see it, I have to do it.
At the age of 17, her father, a former Air Force stealth pilot, brought her to Mongolia. Lauren returned 5 years later with funding from a Fulbright scholarship. Then she earned a PhD based on her work with the eagle hunters.
These are the people that can talk to animals because they have relationships with goats, sheep, horses, camels, eagles. They have intimate knowledge of where snow leopards are and foxes are. There's no agriculture here because the land's not arable. So they've ingeniously learned to domesticate animals and then build these unique relationships with wild animals.
It's a relationship that she learned from people who endure the life of 19th century ranchers. They are Kazakhs, who make up just 4% of Mongolians. They have no running water, no electricity. They survive on meat and milk and burn dung as fuel. The nomads live in clusters of a half-dozen families or so. The boys mind the flocks while the men ride in search of foxes to make furs for sub-zero survival.
In all the years you've been doing this, what have you learned about these animals?
A hunter named Chukan gave us an answer we never saw coming. As they said in the old times, if the horse makes your name famous in a race once a year, the eagle makes your name famous 100 times a year. If I gift to people many foxes, they will say it was Chukan who gifted us the foxes. Eagle hunting is more about your name being spread far and wide among the people. So, if eagle hunting is about the ego of men, we wondered how they saw Lauren McGow.
Did you have any doubt that a woman could hunt with an eagle?
Oh, he said, we've never had a female eagle hunter.
Why did your brother take her in?
She came from a world far away. She had her mind set on learning to hunt with the eagle. Her motivation came from deep in her heart. We just couldn't say no. When Lauren first came to Mongolia, it took her 2 weeks to catch an eagle she could call her own.
How do you catch a golden eagle?
Yes, so you have a dead hare that you lay out with a crow or a raven staked nearby, and you encircle it in a net. So the eagle on migration looks down and sees this hare that only a crow has possession of, and it thinks, I can easily bully that crow out of that rabbit and have a free meal to myself. So it comes in, and when it tries to grab the dead rabbit, the net enfolds around the eagle.
The eagle is taught to feed at the hand of the hunter, and as long as the meals are regular, the eagles are calm, content, and come back for more. They perch on the hunter's arm with a rawhide leash called a jess tied to their legs. They train the birds with a fox pelt tugged by a rope. This is what happens when the eagle zeroes in on a fox. After the bird makes the kill, the hunters ride in, strip the pelt, and give the meat to the eagle. It's a technique well over 1,000 years old.
We may not know exactly when it started, but you don't have to be here in Mongolia very long to figure out why it began. In an area as vast as this, with game so rare, it helps to have a hunting partner that can see 7 times better than a human and cover all of this at about 50 miles an hour.
All right, and now this one.
What is that like? The eagles were kind enough to show us. We custom built a soft rubber camera harness and learned how to fly. Golden eagles are abundant all around the northern hemisphere. In terms of survival as a species, conservationists call golden eagles an animal of least concern.
This is a 10-pound bird, which don't be fooled if that doesn't sound like a lot. They have hollow bones and they're mostly feathers, so 10 pounds on a bird is an enormous bird. They have a 6-foot wingspan. They usually have lovely amber eyes. And the name golden eagle derives from the beautiful golden feathers on their nape. And then the rest...
Around the neck.
Yes, around the neck. They're incredibly effective at killing, which is what they're built for. I mean, they're a modern-day velociraptor, a perfect product of evolution. I will never be tired of a golden eagle flying. Every time it thrills me.
The eagle's talons can close on its prey with a bone-crushing force of 900 pounds per square inch. A fun fact that is no fun to know.
Come on, sweetheart.
Perfect.
Okay.
Very good. And then go ahead and stand up. And then to secure the eagle, place your jesses between your thumb and the rest of your fingers.
Right here.
Yes.
Okay.
The noise that the eagle recognizes is ka.
Okay.
Ka.
All right.
Whenever you're ready, just take off her hood.
Remove the hood.
Yes. Ka.
Oh.
Ka. Ka.
Ah.
Good girl.
Oh, God. What a feeling.
Notice she said, good girl. The only eagles worthy of partnership are female. They're larger, stronger, better hunters. Ironic, since the human partner is traditionally male.
Of all the eagle hunters you've known, how does Lauren rate? How good is she?
She's at the same level as men. She could compete with them. Lauren, now 31, is considered one of the best falconers in the world. She has brought the ancient ways to Oklahoma, where she rehabilitates raptors and trains with her own eagle, named Miles.
What is the career of one of these eagles?
So an eagle is trapped first year, second year, maybe third year on its migration. And then it has a time with an eagle hunter, which could be as short as a year or as long as 6, 7, 8 years. Eventually, they return that eagle back to the wild.
It is part of the tradition to let them go?
Yes. They firmly believe that an older eagle should be in the wild.
What do you say to some people who might watch this and think that the eagles are being abused, that they shouldn't be caught?
I would encourage anybody that has doubts to go out with a falconer. In this country or in the United States or anywhere, we only encourage their natural instincts. The only difference is you are right there. You have a front row seat to see this incredibly million-year-old predator-prey relationship.
Do you worry that one day there will be no more eagle hunters?
A hunter named Uni told us, no, it's an essential art that Kazakhs are born with. Since Kazakhs have come to the earth, they have been practicing this tradition. It will not disappear. Also, each of us has a young person that we teach, like this boy. It passes from generation to generation.
What's at stake if this tradition is lost?
This is where man first figured out that he could have a relationship with a raptor. And what a loss would it be for humanity if it was gone? We can take an individual eagle and bring it from the spectrum of wild all the way to tame and then wild again. And we get to see what they're capable of up close and in person. Man, if that understanding of eagles and animals were to leave, that's not a world I want to live in.
The boy named Becca is the hope of his family's traditional world. He's learning horsemanship and falconry. And it was with Becca that we discovered the most endangered species on the steppe, the nomads themselves. There may be only 300 eagle hunters left, a rare breed of human, still speaking the language of the wild.
Tonight we're going to take you into the wild with a remarkable photographer who spent his life on the trail of elusive and endangered animals. His name is Tom Mangelsen, and at 72 he still travels to remote and inhospitable places. As we first showed you last spring, what he brings back are some of the most spectacular pictures of wild animals you'll ever see. On most mornings for nearly 50 years, this is what Tom Mangelsen has done. He's ventured into the wilderness, camera in hand. Last September in Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming, he waited in an early autumn snowfall for his subject to appear. As is often the case, it took quite a while.
Over the course of your lifetime, the amount of time you've spent waiting is incalculable, I'm sure.
Stupid.
Stupid?
Yeah.
Have you learned anything with all that waiting?
You wait long enough, it does pay off.
For Mangelsen, it usually does. Whether it's a male grizzly bear with battle scars, a cheetah chasing down its prey in Tanzania, or butterflies sipping on the tears of a giant caiman in Brazil, each of Mangelsen's photographs tells a story. His images have documented species like mountain gorillas, black rhinos, and jaguars, once dominant, now in danger. On every continent, in every season, no matter the conditions, Mangelsen has painstakingly built a reputation not on personality, but on patience.
Do you have patience with people the same way you have patience with animals?
No.
No?
No, I don't. I wish I did. I don't know. I don't.
Do you like animals more than people?
Yes.
Really?
Well, not you.
Okay.
He especially likes the dangerous kind. In a jungle in India, where it would be deadly to be on foot, Mangelsen climbed onto an elephant's back for this shot of a Bengal tiger, paws red, fresh from a kill. In the Arctic, where temperatures can be 30 degrees below zero, he spent years documenting the behavior of polar bears. He nicknamed this group the bad boys of the Arctic. He's captured adult male bears play fighting, a mama bear slyly keeping watch as her cubs roughhouse nearby, and a group of bears trying to survive as their world melts away. People often mistake Mangelsen's photographs for paintings, and since the 1970s, he's sold them out of galleries, like this one in Jackson, Wyoming. His photo Catch of the Day is often called the most famous wildlife photograph in the world.
It's such an extraordinary image. In this day and age, people would think that this is Photoshop, that you got a photo of a fish somewhere. And I mean, it's so perfect.
It was taken in 1988 before Photoshop even existed.
People think it's
faked.
fake. But you don't believe in that, I mean, as a photographer.
No, I mean, this is the magic. This is the moment. This is the decisive moment. And this little tiny space right here, I think is so important. Just a quarter of an inch.
It's in its mouth, but it hasn't actually made contact yet with its mouth.
1 nanosecond later.
Mangelsen shuns the use of digital manipulation. What he sees through his lens is what you get. And at a time when many photographers build their portfolios by going to game farms like this one to photograph captive animals, Mangelsen insists on only documenting them in their natural habitat.
Okay, Anderson. See what we can find.
As we saw when we joined him before dawn outside Jackson Hole.
You always get up this early?
There's only one way to do it, is like do it every day, or be really lucky.
He's taking us to a bend he knows on the Snake River.
Do you hear the elk? It's a sharp whistle. That's it. Yeah, that's the sound of the wild deer.
He's been here hundreds of times, trying to get the perfect shot of elk crossing the water.
So now it's just a waiting.
Yep, now
Waiting game.
Waiting, yeah.
What's the longest you've ever spent in any spot, and not here, but anywhere?
42 days with the cougars.
42 days?
Well, I went home at night and slept, and then we go back at daybreak.
But you would spend all day there?
Yeah.
So 12 hours a day?
12, 14.
12 or 14 hours a day for 42 days?
Yeah.
Did you get the shot?
Finally.
This was the shot worth waiting for, the elusive cougar coming out of her den at dusk, taken in 1999. It's among the first photographs to document the life of a wild female cougar. It helped launch a movement to protect the cats against human encroachment. Back at the river, after a 3-hour wait,
Yeah, right between the trees there. There she comes. Well, that's cool. Pretty cool. That's good.
It was worth the wait.
Yeah.
Just kind of extraordinary.
Yeah.
we headed back to his office in Jackson to take a look at an amateur's attempt.
I think it's beautiful.
Yeah,
I think it's gorgeous.
Me too, actually.
There's nothing wrong with that one at all. It's great.
Is she out of focus?
Maybe slightly.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not quite sure. I'm sorry.
Mangelsen's shot was, of course, in perfect focus. And look at what else he's captured at that same river in fall, summer, and winter. Mangelsen credits his father with his love of the wild. He grew up on the bank of the Platte River in Nebraska, where he was schooled in hunting and fishing. As a teenager in the 1960s, Mangelsen earned the title World Champion Goose Caller. No small feat considering this is bird country. Home to 400 species, as well as one of the great migrations on Earth. Every spring, 500,000 sandhill cranes stop on this stretch of the Platte River. They're fattening up on grain before migrating north, as far as Siberia. It is an awesome and ancient ritual. Fossils show cranes have come here for nearly 10 million years. It's a spectacle of sight and sound Mangelsen has shared for 17 years with his friend and ally, Jane Goodall, whose life work with chimpanzees has revolutionized our understanding of primates.
Yeah.
Today, Goodall and Mangelsen team up to raise money and awareness for the protection of cranes, as well as chimpanzees and cougars.
All right.
He's taught me so much about the Platte River and what goes on here, and what it was like when he was a boy, and how he started off as a hunter because that's what one did, and then how gradually he realized he loved these creatures much too much. He couldn't go on being a hunter, and so he hunts with his camera. Here they come. Lots and lots and lots.
Look at the light on those up there.
What's amazing is this ancient migration still carries on.
Yeah.
I think it's completely amazing.
I agree.
It gives me hope that nature will manage in spite of us.
Oh, look at this. Beautiful, huh?
Next year, do you think you could invest in a silent camera? One of the qualities that I love about Tom is his passion. And it's when you have that kind of passion and that kind of commitment that you're more likely to get other people involved, because we can never win an argument by appealing to people's heads. It's got to be in the heart. And I use the power of storytelling and writing, and Tom uses the power of images.
If all artists have a muse, Tom Mangelsen's is this 22-year-old female grizzly bear. She doesn't have a proper name, but is known by the research number 399, a creature from America's wild past when 50,000 grizzlies roamed the lower 48. Less than 2,000 grizzlies remain today. For more than a decade, Mangelsen has chronicled every facet of 399's life, emerging from a long winter's nap, swatting magpies away from a meal. He's watched and worried as she's given birth to 3 sets of triplets and a set of twins. She's nursed, protected, and taught more than a dozen bear cubs. Mangelsen's photographs, including this one he dubbed an icon of motherhood, have made 399 the most famous grizzly in the world.
What do you think it is about grizzly bears that so captures people's imagination?
I think it's the wildness and the rarity and you see intelligent they are. It's like 399 will go to the road and she'll look both ways. She'll tell the kids to stay on one side of the road. She'll go across and then she'll talk to them. Okay, you can come across now. And that's smart.
There's also something about grizzly bears that there's a grace to it, but ferocity is always lurking there.
But I like that idea that we're not the top of the food chain.
In Mangelsen's portraits, ferocious grizzlies have personalities too, but sometimes it's easy to miss the details. Notice a leftover piece of grass tucked in the corner of this grizzly's mouth like a toothpick. But it's Mangelsen's wide shots that may matter the most. They help people understand animals like 399 can't survive without their habitat. Mangelsen took us out to show us why he believes seeing your first grizzly can change your life.
It's right there.
It's right there.
Oh, okay, so it's really close.
It was an adult female grizzly resting just off the road.
That's crazy.
She's a gorgeous bear. Now you see how she just scratched the back of your ear just like your dog might?
Yeah.
Isn't that great? Now she's scratching her belly.
It's so incredible to see. It's amazing.
A third of 399's offspring have been killed in interactions with humans, hit by cars, or shot by elk hunters out of fear. Last year, the grizzlies around Yellowstone were removed from the endangered species list, but planned hunts in Wyoming and Idaho are on hold while a judge decides if the bears should remain protected.
There's people here who have said that they can't wait for a season to open so they can shoot 399, because that would be the biggest prize, the biggest trophy.
You've had hunters actually say that to you, that they want to shoot 399 because 399 is so famous.
Yeah. Hard to believe.
While he worries about what will be lost, Tom Mangelsen is determined to show us the beauty and fragility of what still survives. And so he sets out once again, patiently making his way alone into the wild.
It's my gift in a way that I can give people, hopefully, to preserve what we have left, preserve wilderness, preserve species like grizzly bears, and make them think about it. Make them think that this is what we need to say for our children.
If you want to start a spirited debate at your next holiday meal, ask your guests which country invented wine. France, Italy, or Greece might come to mind. But most scholars say Georgia, the small former Soviet republic, is the birthplace of wine. Scientists say wine residue found on pieces of pottery in Georgia dates back 8,000 years. The country, of nearly 4 million, shares a border with Russia and has survived thousands of years of invasions and wars. Multiple dynasties have come and gone, but somehow many Georgian grapes survived. Tonight, we'll take you on a journey through Georgia to meet the promoters and protectors of Georgia's ancient vines. When you first set foot in Georgia's capital, Tbilisi, she's hard to miss. Perched high up over the city, the towering mother of Georgia wields a sword in her right hand to fend off her enemies and a bowl of wine in her left to welcome friends. That welcome and the country's deep history of winemaking winds through Georgia. The vines of city dwellers cling to tiny balconies. Small family vineyards stretch along the countryside. And larger producers export millions of bottles globally. But to fully understand the rich history of wine in Georgia, we went to the fertile river valley of Kakheti to see the Alaverdi Monastery. At the foot of the Caucasus Mountains, the monastery looks like a fortress. We were invited inside its walls. Our host was Georgian Orthodox Bishop David. He oversees 3 monks who live on the grounds of the medieval compound. It is a quiet life, committed to God and the godly pursuit of creating a perfect glass of wine.
How many bottles of wine do you make here a year?
20,000 bottles with a maximum of 50,000 bottles. Our wine cellar's capacity is 30 tons of wine.
4 monks, 20,000 bottles. This is a lot of work. Do they ever sleep?
We sleep and work at the same time.
Locals help work the land. But for centuries, the monks have been the guardians of these ancient vines. The monastery dates back to the 6th century. Bishop David told us vines were planted on day 1.
Does making wine make you feel closer to God?
Of course. Whenever we are in the vineyard or the wine cellar, we always feel that God is close to us.
Grapes have long held a sacred place in Georgia. In ancient times, wine was considered a divine drink and offered to the gods to win favor. Georgian soldiers tied a piece of grapevine inside the chest of their uniforms to protect them and to assure that if they died in battle, a vine would sprout from their heart. Man was mortal, but Georgian vines eternal. For centuries, the Georgian monks have made wine the same way, producing reds, whites, and even ambers. More on that in a moment. The process is uniquely Georgian. Under the monastery, buried 6 feet deep in the ground, giant clay pots called qvevri are used to ferment, store, and age the wine. It is the traditional way to make wine in Georgia. Many homes have qvevris in their cellar. But today, there are only a handful of qvevri makers who carry on the tradition of hand-building these clay beasts. Some hold nearly 900 gallons of wine. Pressed grapes, skins, stalks, and the juice are all mixed into the qvevri, which is buried in the ground to maintain a constant temperature. Every day during the harvest, the monks make their way through the hallowed halls of the monastery to bless the wine cellar, the grapes, and toast the bounty their vineyards bring. Most of the monks' wine is sold. Some is shared during Sunday communion inside the Alaverdi Cathedral. On this day, a haunting chant stirred inside the cathedral dome. The chant, called "You Are the Vineyard," was written 900 years ago by a former king turned monk to honor Georgia's deep connection to its religion and wine. Lit by candles, it's hard to see the scars of the cathedral. It survived earthquakes and invasions. In an attempt to erase Georgian culture, Russians whitewashed the cathedral interiors in the 20th century, covering up 11th century frescoes, and used the monastery's qvevris to store their gasoline. But miraculously, many of the vines were unharmed. Bishop David says today, 100 grape varieties, some dating back 900 years, are still grown on the monastery's grounds.
And how does the wine taste?
Not to talk about taste, it's better to taste it ourselves.
Sitting near the ancient qvevris, the bishop opened a bottle.
When tasting the qvevri wine for the first time, a person might think they are trying something very different.
Ooh, it does look golden. Amber. Look at that color.
And they say in Georgia that the eye drinks and the eye eats. That's what we have to thankful to God.
There's much to be thankful to God about in this glass.
Of course, it could not be any other way.
Heavenly, with notes of citrus, spices, and honey. It is complex, like the history of Georgia, but in a glass. Georgia's future is also tied to its wines, inspiring chefs like Takuna Gachichi Lodze.
How much is wine a part of the story of this country?
This is, the question, wine or food or wine, It's so together because we don't imagine our everyday life without the wine. And the wine, it's one of the most important part in our history and our culture and in food also.
49-year-old Takuna wasn't supposed to be a chef. While pursuing a psychology degree in New York, she was working at a restaurant and fell in love with both the chef and cooking. She dropped the psych degree and the chef and enrolled in culinary school in Manhattan. A master chef, Takuna is now known as the godmother of Georgia's culinary evolution. She runs the popular Cafe La Terra in the capital of Tbilisi, a restaurant known for its adventuresome menu and wine pairings.
You're credited with revolutionizing Georgian cuisine. How have Georgians responded to that?
I just started to experiment, and then I started to do new recipes based on the traditional ones, and then give this choice, to people. And in the beginning, it was big resistance. The people think you have to keep tradition and untouched. But for me, tradition is always innovation, because every dish was somehow innovative when it started.
Georgia sits at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. A Georgian dinner can look and taste like a trip around the world.
All these influences, starting from China, even from America to Europe, it's gathered here. It was a hub. And that's why our cuisine, traditional cuisine, it was always fusion. So
Georgia was fusion before fusion was fusion.
Exactly. And also because so many invasions, and we were always under the rule of different countries. And this brought these different tastes and the spices and also cooking methods. This is all yours.
Oh, gosh. Perfect.
Culinary clashes are my favorite kind of conflicts to cover. I reported for duty at the dinner table.
That's amazing. Okay. Yes, it's beautiful.
This is our first dish, like an appetizer. It's called phalis, the vegetables with walnuts. We cook in Georgia lots with the walnuts.
Walnuts are one of the workhorses of Georgian cuisine, pulverized and used the same way the French use butter, to make everything creamier. Not surprisingly, grape leaves are also a favorite ingredient.
This is tolma, and you can't imagine any table without this dish.
Our dinner included 5 courses with 6 dishes, each with a different glass of wine.
We have this like a filet mignon.
Do you have a couch that I can recline on?
Yes.
Chef Takuna insisted we taste everything because the wines came from different regions and each had its own unique flavor.
We have so many great winemakers, and it is like a new revolution, and not losing the old traditions. They improve it and then continue doing the great wines.
But there is no wine more distinctly Georgian than this.
You see the difference
Look
of
at
the
color
colors?
of this.
Yeah. That's why it's called amber.
Not orange.
Yeah, no.
Not orange.
Never orange.
No.
Americans know what to do with red wine, we know what to do with white wine, but if you put an amber wine out, I would not know what I should be serving that with.
Actually, this is what's very interesting. Amber wine, it's like a universal wine. You can drink with the vegetables, you can drink with meat, but this is what makes it unique, You can pair almost with everything.
It's versatile. So I noticed you said you don't like to eat when you're cooking, but you will have a sip, right?
But I drink.
Fine, then you can stay.
Something
2 hours later, the warmth of Georgian hospitality, or perhaps all that wine, washed over us.
It's like a Georgian saying that the guests are from the gods. So you have to treat the guest like you treat the gods.
We usually hear about guests from hell, but guests from the gods sounds a lot better.
In Georgia, we got guests are really from the gods. Cheers.
When we come back, you'll meet a guest who came to Georgia for the culture, food, and wine 25 years ago and never left. Today, he's credited with helping to put Georgian wines on the map and menus around the world. When most of us order wine, we look for a favorite variety, consider the region, the age, or perhaps the cost. But ordering a glass of wine from Georgia can be a bit more complicated. The former Soviet bloc nation is the size of West Virginia, but offers more than 40 varieties of wine, each with a tongue-twisting name from vines centuries old. Still, Georgian wine is gaining popularity beyond the country's borders. Last year, nearly 1.5 million bottles of it were shipped to the United States, an increase of nearly 30% from the previous year. We headed to Georgia's wine country to get a taste for ourselves. Stretched along eastern Georgia, more than 4,000 square miles of vineyards sit at the base of its mountains like a welcome mat. This is the Kakheti region. 3/4 of the grapes used to make wine in Georgia are grown here. In the middle of one of Kakheti's hundreds of vineyards, we met an unlikely ambassador of Georgian wine, an American, 47-year-old John Werdeman.
How does an American end up with all of this?
Well, it started with a curiosity for a country that the more I learned about it, the more fascinating it was, and nobody seemed to know anything about it, at least in my world.
Werdeman grew up a world away in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He was studying art in Russia when he visited neighboring Georgia. He liked it so much, he moved here, and in 2006 bought a 62-acre rundown vineyard, hired locals, and started Pheasant's Tears Winery. Georgia is the birthplace of wine. The mild climate and rich soil have made it an ideal place to grow hundreds of varieties of grapes for thousands of years. At one time, the country reportedly had more than 1,400 indigenous grape varieties. Most were wiped out during the Soviet era, when quantity replaced diversity. John Werdeman is part of a national effort to recultivate Georgia's ancient vines and bring them back to life.
So in Soviet times, out of 525 varieties, you had roughly 4 or 5 that were the main ones that were commercially available.
So what happened to the rest?
Luckily, Georgians were still growing them in their backyard. They were allowed to have small private plots for their own personal use, and they kept the ancestral varieties going. So when we wanted to start to bring back these ancient varieties together with our friends, that was where we were going. We were going to the individual backyards of farmers that kept growing the varieties that their grandfathers and great-grandfathers had kept alive.
Clawing back all of the grape varieties is something Georgians take seriously, a kind of declaration of independence from their former Soviet rulers. In 2014, the Georgian government opened 2 research centers to locate, study, and grow those rare grape vines. Scientists head into the vineyards once a week to gather critical data. DNA of grape leaves is analyzed. Juice is extracted in the field and then tested in labs for disease. Healthy vines are replanted. Today, there are more than 500 native grape varieties growing in Georgia. At Pheasant's Tears, ancient Georgian methods are used to make the wine. Stems, skins, and juice are all mixed together, then poured in giant qvevris buried deep underground and sealed with clay, where the mixture ferments and ages.
This is our lower qvevri level.
Is all the wine here made in qvevris?
Most all of it. There's a couple of wines we'll be tasting later that are on the fresher, lighter side from Western Georgia that we use stainless steel, but everything of structure.
So based on where they are, they have a different taste?
Yeah, if they're in a space that breathes versus a reductive space.
The wine typically remains inside the qvevris for 9 months.
This is where we age the wines.
Then it's bottled and stored in a cellar.
So when are these bottles from?
These are from the last 15 years, but it allows us to understand how the wines develop and what is the most ideal time and for releasing.
Nothing is rushed in Georgia, something we witnessed during lunchtime at the vineyard.
For the harvest of 2023, may it be healthy and long living.
Workers were celebrating the harvest with a traditional Georgian feast called a supra, a lavish meal typically held after weddings, funerals, baptisms, and births. During our lunch, guests broke into song. This is a traditional Georgian folk song, centuries old. A few guests started dancing. Lunch hour stretched into dinner. And then came the toasts.
For children, and for the children that are continuing the tradition.
A half dozen of them before dessert.
With so many toasts, so many songs and dancing, it's amazing anybody eats.
Yeah, but the supras last for quite a long time. If workers go out to work for a few hours in the field and they come back together, they'll have a supra and they'll have toasts about the things that mean the most to them in life. For Georgian winemaking, for the grapes, the history, the vessel, the varieties, and the songs that were built around the feast. Some people have called the Georgian supra an academy, where basically people come together in order to share what they know and to learn from one another.
But John Werdeman says schooling the rest of the world on Georgian wines hasn't been so easy. First, there are at least 40 varieties of Georgian wines being served around the world, and even the most sophisticated sommelier might struggle to just pronounce them. Saparavi, Casatelli, and Mitzvani don't exactly roll off the tongue. Then there's the issue of that unusual color, the giant ginger elephant in the glass.
I've noticed a couple people we've spoken to here, when you say orange wine, they shudder a little bit and say, it's amber. Is there any difference?
No, in terms of modern wine syntax, they're synonyms. But I was also a little bit part of the early conversations where when we were talking about orange wine from Georgia, people worried, is this some sort of citrus concoction being sold outside of Atlanta?
What is it that creates that beautiful color?
So you're basically leaving the must or the juice of the grapes with skins, the pips, and sometimes the stems. Basically extracting both pigment as well as phenolic structure from the skins. So that's changing the flavor as well as the color. But it's also, a lot of our preconceptions can affect how we perceive the wine. Because if you were to show them that same wine in a black glass, they might say, what a delightfully refreshing light red. But when they see it from a white grape, they think, is this somehow a bit clumsy or rustic or why? You know, this doesn't taste like my Sauvignon Blanc that I'm used to drinking.
A little frustrating.
A friend of mine who's a master of wine in London has a beautiful saying that she gave at a conference once. She said, the orange or amber wines of Georgia are not the mean sisters of whites, but the introspective cousins of reds.
But over the last decade, the Georgian family of wines, reds, whites, and even ambers, have been embraced around the globe. Last year, Georgia exported over 140 million bottles of wine to more than 65 countries.
What do you attribute to that kind of growth?
I think in the very beginning, we were walking around with maps and photographs and saying that, no, we're not, swarthy versions of Russians, but Georgians have their own language, their own wine culture, their own culinary culture, history that is very ancient, and, try the wines. But it took a fair amount of effort to get people to give us the benefit of the doubt and even to try.
Over the past decade, more than 2,000 new vineyards have taken root in the country. And last year, Georgian winemakers made more than $100 million.
All of a sudden, it's like watching a black and white picture of a rainbow come to color again. This diversity and expanse of color is coming back to the Georgian table after sleeping for almost a few centuries.
For Georgians, it's another reason to celebrate. For the rest of the world, it's a chance to taste history.